A long time ago, way before today's Earth, something ripped through the stars from a faraway galaxy. It was a spaceship battered and burning, heading straight for Earth, but not the Earth we know. This was Earth from centuries ago, wild and unharmed. The ship crashed hard, smashing into a lake so deep and silent that the water itself seemed frozen with fear. The impact shook the forest, and the lake consumed the metal beast beneath its surface. But out of the smoking wreck, two figures appeared. They weren't normal people. They were wearing strange armor, like high-tech suits from a future no one had ever seen. One of them was hurt badly. The other one, trembling and weak, dragged his friend out of the water. Just as he pulled him to safety, his mind flashed with blurry memories, but he didn't have time to think about them. When he finally woke up, the forest was still, but his friend was gone. A brutal chest wound had taken him. There were no cries, no help, only silence and death. Suddenly, the survivor heard a signal, a faint beeping coming from somewhere in the lake. Without wasting a second, he dove back in and pulled out a small capsule-shaped machine. It was still working. He opened it and out came a talking AI. With advanced projecting screens, the spaceman spoke in a language no one on Earth had ever heard. The AI responded coldly, telling him where he had landed on Earth, and the country was Norway. He asked about the others, his team, and maybe more ship, but the machine gave him nothing. There were no other ships and no survivors. It was only him. Hiding his shock, the man ordered the machine to feed him everything it had, info about this planet, its people, its animals, its cultures, and its languages. A scanner popped out and locked onto his eye. He froze. His whole body shook as the data stormed into his brain. It felt like his head might explode, but he didn't stop it. When it ended, he stood there, bleeding his nose and breathing hard. Something in him had changed. He picked up a weapon, one of the few things that had survived the crash, and started testing it, firing into the trees and practicing his aim. By night he dug a grave and laid his friend to rest with no words, only the weight of dirt and sorrow. Alone, armed and stranded in an alien world, the Outlander had one goal now, to stay alive in this massive, dangerous forest with only his weapon, and whatever was left of his strength. As the Outlander kept moving through the forest, trying to make sense of this strange old Earth, he stumbled upon something massive and awful. A giant whale, dead and rotting, its body lying next to what used to be a village. The place was ruined, completely empty, and it looked like whatever had attacked wasn't human at all. There were no survivors, just broken huts, claw marks, and blood in the dirt. He had a strange feeling that something or someone was watching him. Without wasting time, he turned and ran, but before he could get far, a man on horseback came charging out of nowhere, slammed into him, knocked him out cold, and sent his only weapon flying into a nearby river, lost in the current. The Outlander woke up inside a Viking village, surrounded by tall wooden walls and guarded like a prisoner. They had taken him as a hostage while he was still unconscious. Inside a great wooden hall, the king's daughter, a fierce young woman named Freya, was locked in a practice fight with her father, King Hrothgar. Their swords clashed loudly, echoing through the hall. But it wasn't just training. Freya was angry, shouting that she wouldn't marry the arrogant warrior Wulfric, and telling her father he didn't deserve to rule. Hrothgar ended the fight with a sharp cut to her shoulder, not fatal but enough to stop her.
Look at that.
It's fine.
May see it.
And when he saw she was bleeding, he dropped his pride and tried to heal her himself. Hrothgar told her with grief that he believed he might not have much time left to live, and she should marry Wulfric to keep peace in the kingdom. But Wulfric soon arrived, full of himself and acting like he already owned the place. His smug attitude only pushed Freya further away, and she stormed out of the hall. Hrothgar and Wulfric spoke in private. Wulfric said another nearby village had been completely wiped out, with no one left alive. Hrothgar knew this would cause big trouble. Gunnar, the chief of that village who was away on a trading trip, would think they were behind it. To make things worse, Wulfric told him that during the search they had captured a strange man who didn't seem to belong to any known land or tribe. Hrothgar gave him one command: to figure out what really happened, or they were all heading straight toward war. The strange man they had captured was dragged in front of the villagers. They stared and laughed at his strange clothes and odd look, thinking he was a fool or a cursed man. Wulfric took him to a small hut to question him. When asked where he came from, Kanan introduced himself and gave a fake story. He told them he was from a faraway island and had come here to hunt dragons.
A dragon.
The warriors didn't buy it for a second. They believed he was the one who destroyed the nearby village. Kanan knew things were getting worse. He tried to fight his way out, but the Vikings were too strong and held him down.
Oh yes.
Later, while locked inside the hut, he grabbed a hot iron bar and tried to escape. Just as he was about to break free, the guard outside heard something strange and decided to check. But before the guard could enter, Freya appeared. She said she had come to treat Kenan's wounds, as Wulfric had told her to. The guard, who acted more like a wild animal than a soldier, sniffed her like some kind of beast, then walked inside with her, kicking Kenan just for fun as he left the room. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Hrothgar stood with a heavy look on his face and asked Wulfric what the strange outlander had told them so far. Wulfric crossed his arms and told him the man wasn't talking, not even a little, completely refusing to cooperate. Hrothgar didn't seem surprised. Instead, he told Wulfric something that needed to be done. Someone had to go find Gunnar, the chief of the ruined village, and tell him that Hrothgar's people were not behind the attack. Wulfric didn't like the idea at all. He clearly had issues with Gunnar because of what happened in the past, but Hrothgar reminded him that the blame wasn't one-sided, and warned him not to let old anger cloud his judgment. If Wulfric wanted to lead one day, he had to control both his mind and heart. Meanwhile, somewhere else inside the village, Freya and Keenan sat in silence, watching each other carefully, their curiosity slowly growing. Freya finally asked if he had anything to do with the destruction of Gunnar's village. But Keenan shook his head and denied it. Then, without warning, Keenan snapped into action. He broke free from his restraints and attacked both Freya and the guard inside the room, striking fast and hard. The guard went down, and Keenan disappeared into the night. He tried to make a silent escape, and honestly, it almost worked. But one of the outer guards noticed that his partner was gone and went to check on him. Just as the guard stepped closer, something in the shadows struck. An unseen creature leaped out and tore into him. A second later, the horns blasted through the air, their deep sound rolling over the village, warning everyone that they were under attack. The Vikings grabbed their weapons and rushed into formation, fully convinced that this was Gunnar's revenge. But when they rushed outside, there was no one, no warriors, no torches, and not even a trace of the enemy. That was when the fear truly started to sink in. The enemy wasn't out there. It was already inside the village. Screams rang out, then came the fire. Something unknown had begun killing everyone and setting parts of the village ablaze. Inside the stables, a horrible creature with long tentacles was moving fast and hiding in the shadows. Keenan immediately recognized the signs and started chasing it, dodging between buildings, trying to stay close to the beast. But one of the Viking guards thought Keenan was the problem and started chasing him instead. Now it was a deadly maze. Keenan was hunting the creature, and the guard was hunting Keenan. The guard finally caught up and, thinking he had him cornered, raised his sword to strike. But the sword shattered in his hands, and before he could react, something grabbed him as he screamed into the dark. Keenan turned just in time to see another guard being lifted off the ground by what looked like claws. His voice broke through the chaos as he shouted a single name, the creature's true name. The real beast he had been chasing all along, the so-called dragon from his world. But before Keenan could do anything more, the Vikings caught him again. They didn't want to hear another word. They tied him up to a giant rock in the middle of the village, thinking he was behind everything. Helpless, Keenan sat there and watched flames tear through the place. His eyes stared into the chaos while his mind drowned in painful memories. Flashes of the Morwen destroying his own world, of his people screaming and dying, and of everything he had lost. The next morning, as the sun slowly climbed over the smoky remains of the village, a poor village boy, looking scared and thin, nervously stepped up to Keenan, who was still tied to a rock. The boy held out a chunk of bread, unsure if he should even be there, and Keenan, eyes tired and full of suspicion, took it slowly without saying a word. Meanwhile, all around the village, the grown men were shouting and arguing, trying to figure out what the beast was, who brought it there, and whether or not it would return again. With no answers, they dragged Keenan to King Hrothgar's hall. They demanded the truth. They wanted to know about this so-called dragon Keenan claimed to be hunting. Keenan didn't hold back this time. He told them that the monster was real, that it was called the Morwen, and that it wasn't a creature of this land. It followed him from his spaceship, and it had wiped out his people. It moved through the dark like death itself, and worst of all, it tricked its victims with glowing lights, only to rip them apart when they got too close. He looked them in the eyes and told them this thing could wipe out every living soul on Earth if they didn't stop it soon. He even confessed something that shook the villagers. He told them he was the reason the Morwen was there. He had brought it to their land, even if he never meant to. The villagers exploded in anger and grabbed their weapons, ready to execute him right then and there, but Hrothgar raised his hand and stopped them. He didn't fully believe Keenan's story, but something in the man's eyes made him hesitate. Keenan saw the change and quickly begged the king to let him help. He said if they were planning to hunt the Morwen, they would need him, because no one else on Earth knew what they were dealing with.
Take me with you.
Hrothgar ordered his men to take him with them. The soldiers gave him a horse. Freya wasn't so forgiving. She punched Keenan in the face for attacking her earlier, but then she turned away and let it go. As the warriors left the village in search of the beast, Keenan got handed a drink by a blacksmith named Boromir, but he barely tasted it before spitting it out and tossing it aside. Hrothgar, riding beside him, asked why he looked like a man already mourning the dead. Keenan didn't smile. He told the king that if they didn't stop the Morwen now, this village would burn just like his own world did. They pressed deeper into the forest, but it wasn't long before things went wrong. Wulfric brought his horse to a stop when he found scattered corpses, ripped and shredded across the trail, their faces frozen in terror. He suggested they split into search groups, but Keenan told him that was a stupid idea, that it would just make them easier to pick off one by one. Hrothgar thought about it but stuck with the original plan. They would split into pairs and cover more ground. It didn't take long before trouble found them. Hrothgar noticed blood dripping down from above and onto his spear, and just as he looked up, a horse's severed head came crashing down from above, landing with a sickening thud in front of him and Boromir. In another part of the woods, one of the pairs stumbled across scattered bodies in a strange cave carved deep into the hillside. Keenan was with Wulfric and noticed weird trails of blood long and twisted like something had been dragged. Keenan's instincts kicked in, and he told Wulfric they weren't alone. That's when they heard the screams, raw and terrified, coming from the cave. They all regrouped fast and ran toward the cave together. Inside, they didn't find the Morwen, but they did find a massive, furious bear, ready to kill anything in its path. The fight broke out instantly. The beast clawed and roared, throwing men across the ground, and for a moment it seemed like someone would die. But Keenan charged in, found the right moment, and drove his sword straight into the creature, ending it. Hrothgar watched the way Keenan moved and the way he fought. He saw strength and fearlessness in him. After the bear collapsed, Hrothgar made a decision. He looked at Keenan and told him that from that moment on, he was no longer a prisoner. He had earned his freedom.
It's yours again.
The whole village came alive with drums and laughter as everyone gathered to celebrate the victory over the bear. Keenan walked into the feast, now dressed like one of them, and the villagers cheered him on like he had always belonged. He sat beside Hrothgar, still stunned by how quickly they had accepted him. As they ate, the boy who once gave Keenan bread appeared again, and Keenan, wanting to thank him, handed him the sword that killed the bear, asking only for his name. The boy said it was Eric. Hrothgar then explained that Eric had no parents and that the villagers were looking after him. Wulfric stood and called for a game. He wanted to play something called shields. Men dropped their shields into a square, and competitors had to move across them without falling. Keenan gave it a shot, pulled a wild move, stumbled, and landed right on Boromir. The crowd laughed, but Wulfric helped him up, showing respect. The people roared, happy to see Keenan as one of their own. Later that night, after the food and noise had settled, Keenan stepped outside and saw Freya waiting. She smiled and thanked him for saving her father during the hunt, and there was a look in her eyes that said more than her words. Keenan, growing serious, told her the truth. The bear wasn't the real threat. It was the Morwen, and it was coming back. Suddenly a war horn shattered the night. Gunnar's warriors had stormed the village, smashing through the gates. Swords clashed, fires rose, and chaos spread everywhere. Keenan and Freya fought side by side, each taking down enemies with fierce precision. Hrothgar faced Gunnar, who slammed him to the ground, ready to finish him. But Keenan got there first and blocked the final blow. Before Gunnar could recover and strike again, his warriors pulled him back, yelling that the fight was lost. Gunnar screamed curses at Hrothgar, accusing him of murdering his people, before disappearing with his men into the night. The village slowly began to recover from the ambush. Keenan, bruised and bleeding, leaned against a wall. Freya found him and cleaned his wounds. As she patched him up, she explained who Gunnar really was. Years ago, Wulfric's father had wanted to unite all the villages to fight the Franks, but Gunnar refused to join them. Each side saw the other as traitors. That's where the hatred began. Gunnar and his men were deep in the wild, huddled around the fire and whispering plans for their next strike on Wulfric's village. They were angry, proud, and ready for payback. But just as they plotted in the shadows, one of their warriors wandered off toward the lake to take a piss, not knowing that something was already watching him from the dark water. The Morwen, hiding beneath the surface, attacked without warning. The man didn't even have time to scream properly before he vanished into the blackness. Moments later, chaos exploded around the camp. One by one, Gunnar's men dropped, taken by something they couldn't see, something too fast and too cruel to fight. The survivors panicked, believing it was Wulfric's men who had ambushed them. But it wasn't arrows or blades that tore them down. It was something much worse. Now Gunnar was all alone, standing in front of the monster. It looked nothing like anything he had ever faced, but instead of running, he drew his weapon and went at it head on. Back in Wulfric's village, the gates were shut tight and the guards stood ready. A few of Gunnar's warriors came stumbling out of the forest, screaming and begging for shelter. They dropped their weapons and held their hands up, terrified and bleeding. But Wulfric didn't trust any of it. He thought it was a trick. He ordered his archers to stand by and they raised their bows. Then, out of the dark trees came Gunnar himself, somehow alive and still running. He shouted for help. Still Wulfric hesitated. The archers let their arrows fly. Some of the men fell where they stood, but Gunnar survived. That's when Keenan stepped forward and yelled for them to stop. Just as Wulfric rushed at Gunnar, about to strike, everyone suddenly froze. A blue light appeared in the trees. It blinked, shimmered, and then wrapped around a man in the forest, lifting him into the air like a puppet. The light turned red, and within seconds, the man was gone. Screams followed as the Morwen showed itself and vanished into the trees again. Now, no one could deny it. The monster was real. All of the men gathered in the great hall. Gunnar shouted that fighting the beast was hopeless, like trying to break stone with your fists. Keenan agreed, but Wulfric didn't want to hear it. He turned on Keenan, saying he didn't belong here and no one should trust him. Keenan had enough. He fired back, reminding everyone how wrong Wulfric had been about the bear, about Gunnar, and about everything else. They almost came to blows, but Hrothgar stepped in before it got worse. The old king looked at both of them, and then made his choice.
And my judgment is that the Outlander is correct.
He said Keenan's plan would be followed with no more arguments. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. By the next morning, the village was busy with one urgent mission, building a trap big enough to fit a monster. Keenan stood at the gate, pointing out where the pit should be dug, asking for all the flammable stuff they could find. The villagers didn't know what he had in mind exactly, but they trusted him enough to start digging anyway. They carved out a deep pit, wide enough to fit a bear, and inside they rammed sharpened poles into the earth, soaking everything in strange oils. Once that was done, they covered the top with wooden shields, and arranged it all to look like a harmless little hut, hoping the beast would step right in without suspecting a thing. With the trap set, Hrothgar approached Keenan and offered him a place among his people. Later that evening, Keenan walked into his hut and found Freya waiting inside, already stirring a pot of stew over the fire. They sat together, shared the meal, and that's when Keenan finally opened up about the truth. His people were not explorers, they were conquerors. When they landed in the place where the Morwen had lived, they dropped bombs and wiped out nearly every creature in sight. It was a nuclear war, and once the Morwens were dead, the land was theirs. Keenan's reward for helping with the slaughter was a home for his family on the new planet. But he left for another mission, and while he was gone, one last Morwen, hiding in the ship's vents, survived and killed the rest of the people there. That same Morwen was now here, hunting and killing again. Keenan blamed himself for everything. Freya listened quietly and told him not to carry that guilt alone, saying maybe it was the will of the gods. But Keenan said there were no gods and no fate, only choices and consequences. Freya didn't argue. Instead, she got up, walked to the corner, and handed him her family's ancient king's sword, telling him to fight better this time and not give up. With the trap nearly ready, even Gunnar agreed to help. The warriors opened the village gates, and Keenan and Wulfric stepped out into the darkness, waiting for the beast to come. It was too quiet. They could barely see anything past the trees. Time crawled. Then Keenan lit a torch and threw it into the woods, hoping to scare something out. But what he saw next froze the pair. The Morwen was already there, standing right in front of them, hidden by shadows until now. Before they could react, the village priest stepped out of nowhere, holding up his hands and praying loudly, calling the beast a servant of Lucifer.
Quit this place!
But the Morwen didn't care about holy words. It ripped him apart in seconds, his screams swallowed by the creature. Keenan and Wulfric bolted toward the trap, the Morwen at their backs, sprinting across the top of the shield platform that hid the pit. But things went sideways fast. Wulfric slipped and crashed into the oil beside the monster, and the gates behind them slammed shut as the villagers prepared the flaming arrows. Keenan knew there wasn't time. He shouted for Wulfric from the small hatch on the other side. As the archers raised their fire-lit bows, Keenan reached down, grabbed Wulfric's arm, and pulled him out just in time. A heartbeat later, the trap exploded in flames. Just when the villagers thought they had won and the fire was still blazing from the explosion, a terrifying surprise struck from behind. Another Moonwind appeared, smaller than the first but no less deadly, and it crept into the area where the women had been hiding, its eyes glowing and its claws ready to tear through anything. Freya, without thinking twice, rushed in to protect everyone, but before she could strike, the beast slammed into her and sent her flying across the room, crashing hard against the wall. Her father, hearing the noise, ran in to help her, and for a moment, he stood bravely between the monster and his daughter. But the struggle didn't last long, and soon, he too was thrown to the ground, left helpless and wounded. As if things couldn't get any worse, the first and bigger Moonwind burst through the fire, still alive and now more furious than ever. Keenan and Wulfric had no choice but to fight side by side, charging at the creature with everything they had, but even together they barely made a scratch. Then Gunnar jumped in to help, swinging wildly, trying to land a blow. But the beast was too fast and too strong. In one brutal flash, Gunnar's head was ripped clean off, and the creature vanished into the shadows again. Before anyone could process what just happened, Eric ran up to Keenan and told him there was a second Moonwind, and now Freya was in danger. They rushed to her and found her holding her father's dead body, her face filled with shock and pain. The next morning, with fear spreading through every home, the entire village packed up and prepared to flee, afraid that another attack could happen at any moment. Eric wanted to stay behind with Keenan, begging to stay by his side, but Keenan knew it was too risky. He told Eric the place wasn't safe anymore and that he had to leave with the rest on the boats. He promised the boy they'd see each other again, even though deep down, he didn't know if that was true. They said goodbye. Later, Keenan found Wulfric again. Wulfric was broken and full of doubt. He had lost too many people and no longer believed he deserved to be king. But Keenan told him this was not over, and if they were going to stop the monsters, they would have to fight together. So the two of them gathered a small group of brave men and decided to head underground through the village's main well, believing that must be where the smaller Moonwind had come from. The idea sounded insane, but it was the only clue they had left, and no one else had a better plan. Before heading out, Keenan went to Boromir and told him to get ready to forge better weapons. This time, they needed blades strong enough to actually hurt the Morwins, and Keenan said he would bring the right kind of metal to make that happen. With Wulfric and Freya by his side, Keenan made his way to the crash site of his old spaceship, diving down into the dark lake where the ship had sunk a few weeks ago. After swimming deep below the surface, he finally found the materials he needed, but there was something else. One of the Morwins was waiting under the water, and it nearly caught him before he escaped to the surface. But when Keenan emerged from the lake, gasping for air, he saw the worst. The boat they had used to get there was destroyed, completely torn apart, and Freya was gone. He only found Wulfric, and together they made their way back to the village, afraid of what might have happened to her. Boromir finished crafting a sword like no other, massive, powerful, and sharper than anything they had ever seen. When Keenan swung it once through the air, the blade sliced clean through a piece of metal as if it were paper, proving that this was their chance to truly fight back. Keenan was all set and ready when he climbed down the well, deeper and deeper, until he finally reached a strange underground grotto that felt like a cave beneath the village. The place was damp, dark, and deadly quiet, and once the rest of the group caught up to him, they moved forward together into the unknown. What they didn't expect was that the ground felt cracked and overheated, like some volcanic eruptions had once torn through the place. Far away from them, Freya suddenly opened her eyes. She realized she was trapped in the monster's nest, completely surrounded by the rotting remains of their past victims. Bones were stacked like furniture, and the smell was enough to choke her. She stumbled to her feet and tried to sneak out, but before she could get far, one of the Morwins spotted her. Just as it was about to strike, it stopped, its head turning sharply, sensing intruders. Without a second thought, the beast ran off toward Keenan's group, leaving Freya alive at least for now. Back underground, Keenan and the others entered a massive cave that opened into a lava floor full of holes and unstable paths. Everything was glowing red and dangerous, and before they could plan their next move, the Morwen came at them. The attack was fast, brutal, and loud, and the group had no choice but to scatter in different directions. Wulfric made his way back to Keenan, and together they snuffed out their torches, trying to avoid giving away their location, and slowly crept forward until they found what looked like the heart of the monster's lair. The stench of death was everywhere. One of the soldiers made a sharp sound after tripping, and that tiny noise was all it took. One of the Morwins snapped its head toward him and lunged, killing the soldier in a heartbeat. Keenan saw no other option. He charged forward, slashing with everything he had and managed to wound the beast. But the monster didn't stay down. It roared back to life, slammed into the walls, and ran away, but not before taking Boromir's life with it. Meanwhile, Freya had managed to stand up and was desperately calling for the others. Their voices echoed through the tunnels until they finally located each other. But before they could reunite, something moved in the shadows. The wounded Morwen returned, blinded by the fight but now relying completely on sound. As the group made noise, it suddenly charged at Freya, its rage even more dangerous now. Freya barely dodged a devastating blow, and to reach her friends, she had to squeeze through a hole in the rock, but it was too narrow for her to pass through quickly. There was no time and no other option. Keenan passed the giant sword through the hole to Freya, and in a single swift move, she turned and drove the blade straight into the beast, killing it instantly. They all got back together, but instead of celebrating, they froze. What they saw around them was worse than anything they'd imagined. The Morwen cave wasn't just a hiding place, it was a graveyard filled with more corpses than their entire village population. The silence didn't last long. Something huge was coming, and they didn't wait around to see what it was. They ran, climbing toward a waterfall that dropped off a high mountain ledge, but the rocks were soaked and slippery, making it almost impossible to get away. They tried anyway. Freya slipped and nearly fell into the abyss, but Keenan grabbed her in time, pulling her back with everything he had. At the same moment, the adult Morwen had arrived, discovering its dead offspring, and it charged towards the group. Wulfric screamed to get Freya out of there. As he faced the creature, it tried to swallow him whole, but Wulfric, in a last-ditch burst of rage, managed to strike the monster straight in the face, wounding it and finally stopping its rampage. Freya was alive but barely moving, while the Morwen picked up Wulfric's lifeless body and hurled it like trash at Keenan, leaving him all alone to face the monster. Keenan stood frozen for a moment, staring straight into the beast's eyes, and for a brief second, the creature locked eyes with him too, but then turned and vanished into the darkness. Keenan didn't waste time. He chased it back into the cave, swinging his sword, but just as he stepped in, the Morwen's tentacle whipped out of the shadows. Keenan ducked and slashed, slicing off part of the creature's limb, though he didn't land a clean hit. Following the trail of blood, Keenan stumbled deeper into the cave, tired, dizzy, and losing strength fast. Somewhere along the way, he spotted the creature's blood and it attacked from behind. Slamming him to the ground, he passed out, only to wake up moments later, using the flat side of his sword like a mirror to check what was behind him. His instincts were right. Just as the Morwen crept up to strike, Freya came charging out of nowhere, stabbing the beast with all her strength. That moment was all Keenan needed. He spun around and drove his sword toward the creature, but it still wasn't enough. The Moonwar grabbed him and dragged him toward the edge of the cliff. Freya held onto Keenan with both hands as the monster hung from the cliff below, refusing to let go. It was a desperate tug of war, and just when it looked like Keenan might lose, he raised his blade one last time and cut through the Moonwar's hand, sending it screaming into the waterfall below. They climbed back up to Wulfric, who was barely breathing, and he asked with weak eyes if the monster was finally gone. They told him yes. With shaking hands, Wulfric handed Keenan the medallion that made him king and told him he regretted not being a better friend. Keenan leaned in and told him he had always considered him a friend. That was the last thing Wulfric had ever heard before he passed away. Keenan and Freya made their way up the cliff and saw Eric and the surviving villagers waiting in boats down by the water. They shared one last kiss, holding on like the world was ending. But even after everything they had survived, Keenan told Freya he couldn't stay. There was still something else he had to do. She didn't say anything, but her eyes made it clear that she was afraid he might never come back. He returned alone to the wreckage of his spaceship, walking through the ruins of his past. Inside, in a broken glass chamber, lay the truth he had been hiding. His wife, who had been placed in suspended animation for the journey, and had died when the ship crashed and the power source failed. He whispered his final goodbye to her and turned back to the strange machine that had brought him here. It sent a signal to his homeworld, calling his people to find him. But just when he could have gone back, Freya watched from the trees as Keenan destroyed the machine, shattering his only way home. He had made his choice. In the end, Freya narrated what followed. Wulfric and Hrothgar were buried with the greatest Viking honors for their bravery. Keenan, once a stranger fallen from the stars, was crowned their king. Freya became his queen, while little Eric became their adopted son. Freya said that though Keenan had come from the gods, when the time came to return to them, he chose to stay with them instead.